sun did blow over Florence, casting long shadows across the narrow streets. The air was filled with the scent of ink and parchment as Luca, a young apprentice, hurried to finish binding the last of the day's prints. He worked in the back of the small print shop, his hands stained with black ink, the faint sound of the city's bustling markets drifting in through the open window. Luca's master, Signor Battista, was known for his collection of rare and ancient texts. Today he had tasked Luca with repairing a crumbling book, its leather cover cracked with age. Luca carefully turned the delicate pages, marveling at the handwritten notes in the margins, a glimpse into the thoughts of a long-forgotten scholar. As he reached the end of the book, something unusual caught his eye. A single page was folded over, tucked neatly between the last two leaves. Luca frowned. This wasn't part of the original text. He gently pried the page free, revealing a small, folded manuscript. It was made of thin, fragile parchment, covered in strange symbols and unfamiliar handwriting. "What is this?" Luca whispered to himself, running his fingers over the faded ink. The symbols looked like a cipher, a code meant to hide its true meaning. His heart raced with excitement. He had always been fascinated by puzzles and riddles, and this felt like an invitation into a hidden world. He glanced around the empty shop. Signor Battista had already left for the day, and the streets outside were quieting as the city prepared for nightfall. Luca tucked the manuscript into his pocket, a thrill of secrecy coursing through him. He knew he should have handed it over to his master, but something deep inside him urged him to keep it hidden, to uncover its secrets on his own. By the light of a single candle, Luca pored over the manuscript. That night, in his tiny attic room, the symbols swirled before his eyes, a mix of Greek letters and strange swirling shapes he couldn't recognize. He scribbled notes furiously, trying to make sense of the cipher. It felt like the manuscript was whispering to him, its secrets just out of reach. Hours passed, the candle burning low, when suddenly it clicked. A pattern he hadn't seen before. He grabbed his quill and scrawled out the letters, his hand shaking with anticipation. The cipher resolved into a single sentence in Latin: "The path to knowledge lies where shadows meet the sun." Luca's breath caught in his throat. He knew this phrase. It was an old saying whispered by scholars who believed in a lost library, a repository of forbidden knowledge from the ancient world, hidden away to protect its secrets. A map followed the decoded message, crudely sketched but unmistakable. It pointed to the hills outside of Florence, where old ruins lay forgotten. Luca's pulse raced. He had found something extraordinary, something that could change the course of his life forever. But he also knew that knowledge like this was dangerous. If anyone found out what he had discovered, it would cost him everything. With the map clutched in his hand, Luca realized he was standing at the edge of an adventure far greater than anything he had ever imagined. The next morning, the sun rose over Florence, casting a golden light on the city's domes and spires. Luca's mind was still buzzing with the revelation from the night before. He knew he couldn't keep the secret for long. Someone would notice the missing manuscript. But for now, he had the adventure, and he intended to use it. He tucked the map into the lining of his vest and set off for the print shop. The streets were already alive with merchants setting up their stalls, the scent of fresh bread wafting through the air. Luca couldn't help but notice how ordinary everything seemed, even though he felt like the world had shifted beneath his feet. As he entered the shop, Signor Battista glanced up from his desk. "You're late," he grumbled, not looking up from the pages he was sorting. "I apologize, master," Luca said quickly, ducking his head. He moved to the back of the shop, his heart pounding. He needed time to plan his next move, but before he could slip away, the door swung open with a sharp creak. A man stepped inside, tall and cloaked, his face hidden in shadow. He carried an air of authority, and the room seemed to grow colder as he entered. "I'm here for the old book," the stranger said, his voice smooth but edged with a threat. "The one recently brought in from the monastery." Luca felt his blood run cold. He knew exactly which book this man was referring to, the one that held the secret manuscript. He watched from the corner of his eye as Signor Battista hesitated. "I'm not ready yet," Battista said cautiously. "It's being repaired." The stranger's eyes narrowed, glinting like steel. "I need it now. The contents are important." Luca's breath hitched. He couldn't let the manuscript fall into the hands of the man. He slipped quietly toward the back door, heart pounding in his chest. Just as his fingers touched the door handle, the stranger's voice called out, "Boy!" Luca froze, turning slowly. The man's gaze was fixed on him, sharp as a knife. "You were handling the book yesterday, weren't you?" the man asked. Luca nodded, forcing himself to stay calm. "Yes, but I found nothing unusual," he lied. The stranger took a step closer, his face still hidden in shadow. "If you come across anything unexpected, you'll bring it directly to me. understand?" "Yes, sir," Lucas stammered, bowing his head. The man's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer before he turned and swept out of the shop, the door slamming shut behind him. Luca exhaled shakily, his mind racing. He had just come face to face with someone who clearly knew about the manuscript. He couldn't waste any more time. He needed to follow the map and find the lost library before anyone else did. He slipped out of the back door and into the narrow alley, his heart set on the hills outside of Florence. He had no idea what awaited him, but he knew one thing: the race for the forbidden knowledge had begun. Luca moved swiftly through the narrow alleys of Florence, the sounds of the bustling city fading behind him. He could still feel the stranger's eyes on him, piercing and cold, as if they had left a mark on his soul. He clutched the map hidden in his vest, its crinkled edges pressed against his chest like a beating heart. He couldn't afford to waste time. Every second brought him closer to discovery, but it also brought his pursuers closer. As the city's rooftops gave way to the rolling countryside, Lucas slowed his pace, taking a moment to catch his breath. The sun was high now, casting long shadows across the path as he made his way up to the steep, rocky trail toward the hills. The map's crude lines and symbols guided him, leading him toward a place he had only heard of in whispers, the ancient ruins of an old Etruscan temple, long abandoned and overgrown. He stopped at the edge of a dense grove of olive trees, unfurling the map once more. He traced his finger along the route, his eyes narrowing as he recognized a symbol stretched near the edge of the page, a sun setting behind the hill, its rays mingling with shadow. "The path to knowledge lies where shadows meet the sun," he murmured, recalling the decoded message. He glanced up, squinting against the bright light. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long fingers of shadow across the hillside. Taking a deep breath, Luca plunged into the grove, ducking beneath low-hanging branches. The air here was cooler, filled with the earthly scent of soil and damp leaves. He pushed through the underbrush, his heart pounding in his ears. He knew he was close. He emerged into a small clearing, and there it was, an ancient stone archway, half buried in ivy, the last remnant of the temple that once stood here. The sunlight slanted through the arch, illuminating a small stone pedestal at its base. Luca's breath caught in his throat. He had found it, but before he could step forward, a noise behind him made him freeze. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. Luca turned slowly, his hand instinctively going to his dagger he carried at his belt. Emerging from the shadows was a cloaked stranger from the print shop, followed by two burly men with scarred faces. The stranger's hood was pushed back now, revealing a gaunt face with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. "I must say, you led us straight to it," the man said, his voice dripping with mock admiration. "Quite the clever apprentice." Luca's mind raced. He had been followed, tracked out of the city like prey. He glanced back at the pedestal, realizing that whatever lay hidden here, it was worth killing for. "I don't know what you're talking about," Luca bluffed, stepping back slowly. The stranger's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know exactly what I mean. The manuscript, the map. You've uncovered something far beyond your understanding, boy. Now hand it over." Luca's grip tightened on his dagger. He knew he was outnumbered, but he couldn't give up now. He had come too far, and the knowledge hidden here was too important to fall into the wrong hands. He took a deep breath and then turned, sprinting toward the archway. Luca's footsteps pounded against the earth as he ran, the wind whipping through his hair. He could hear the men behind him, their shouts growing louder as they realized he was making a break for it. He reached the stone pedestal and dropped to his knees, searching frantically for any sign of a mechanism, a hidden lock, anything that could help him. He ran his fingers over the worn carvings, tracing the symbols etched into the stone. They matched the symbols from the manuscript: a sun, a shadow, and a key. He pressed the key-shaped indentation with all his strength, feeling the stone shift slightly beneath his hand. There was a low grinding sound, like ancient gears turning after centuries of rest. The ground beneath the pedestal trembled, and a narrow stone door slid open, revealing a dark passageway that led underground. Luca didn't hesitate. He plunged into the darkness, the chill of the underground air wrapping around him like a shroud. He could hear the strangers shouting behind him, but the voices grew muffled as the stone door began to close. Luca held his breath, praying he had enough time. The door shut with a heavy thud, sealing him inside. He was alone now, enveloped in darkness. He took a moment to steady his breathing, and pulled out the small lantern he had brought, lighting it with trembling hands. A flickering flame illuminated a narrow tunnel, its walls lined with carvings of strange angular symbols. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and old stone. Luca knew he had found the entrance to something ancient, something forgotten by time. He followed the tunnel deeper, the sounds of his pursuers fading away completely. His mind raced with possibilities, stories he had heard about the lost library, a place said to hold the forbidden knowledge of the ancient world, texts that had been hidden away by scholars fearing their power. The tunnel opened up into a vast underground chamber. Luca held up his lantern, his eyes widening as the light revealed row after row of stone shelves, each one filled with scrolls and manuscripts. It was a lost library, just as the legends had described. He stepped forward, running his fingers over the ancient scrolls. Some were written in Greek, others in Latin, and a few in languages he couldn't even recognize. The texts could hold secrets lost for centuries, philosophy, forbidden sciences, even the lost works of great thinkers. But before he could reach for a scroll, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing in the chamber. He spun around, holding up the lantern. The cloaked stranger stepped into the light, a satisfied smile on his face. "Did you really think you could escape me?" he asked, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Luca backed away, his eyes darting around the room. He needed to find a way out, but he was trapped. "You found the library," the stranger said, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Now you will help me to unlock its secrets." Luca felt a wave of determination wash over him. He hadn't come this far just to hand over the knowledge to someone who would use it for power. He raised the lantern higher, the flame casting long shadows. "I won't help you," he said, his voice strong and defiant. "This knowledge doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to anyone." The stranger's smile twisted into a sneer. "Then I have no use for you." He lunged forward, but Luca was ready. Luca leapt back, dodging the stranger's grasp. The man's face twisted in fury, his eyes gleaming in the dim lantern light. The underground chamber felt colder now, as if the ancient secrets held within its stone walls were drawing the warmth from the air. Luca's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of the centuries-old knowledge surrounding him, pressing down on him like a physical force. "You have no idea what you're holding," the stranger hissed, stepping closer. "These scrolls contain the forbidden knowledge of the ancient world, alchemy, lost philosophies, even the secrets of life and death. Do you really think a mere apprentice like you could understand their value?" Luca raised the lantern higher, the flame flickering as he stepped back toward the central pedestal of the chamber. "It's not about understanding their value," he shot back. "It's about who gets to decide what's done with it. The knowledge was hidden for a reason. It wasn't meant to fall into the hands of someone like you." The stranger's lips curled into a smirk. "You're naive," he said. "This power is wasted on scholars and scribes. It should belong to those who can use it, shape the world with it. Give me the map, boy, and I'll spare your life." Luca felt a surge of anger. He knew now what he had to do. He glanced down at the pedestal, where an ancient brass lever jutted out from the stone. The carvings around it showed images of fire and collapsing walls, symbols of destruction. The library wasn't just a place of knowledge, it was also a trap. The scholars who built it had created a way to destroy it, if the secrets ever fell into the wrong hands. Luca's resolve hardened. He would rather see the library destroyed than let it be used for power and greed. "Is this what you were looking for?" Luca asked, pulling the crumbled map from his vest. He held it up, watching the stranger's eyes light up with greed. "Yes," the stranger breathed, reaching out. "Hand it over." Luca took a deep breath and in one swift motion threw the map into the flames of his lantern. The paper ignited instantly, curling into ash. The stranger's face contorted in rage, but before he could react, Luca yanked the brass lever with all his strength. A deep rumble shook the chamber. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and dust rained down from the ceiling. The ancient mechanisms of the library, untouched for centuries, had been activated. "What have you done?" the stranger screamed, lunging toward Luca. Luca darted to the side, just as the stone shelves began to crumble. Scrolls and manuscripts toppled to the ground, engulfed in a cloud of dust. The walls of the chamber cracked, splitting open like the shell of an egg. "You destroyed it," the stranger shouted, coughing as the dust filled the air. "You destroyed everything." "No," Luca said calmly, stepping back toward the tunnel. "I saved it." He turned and sprinted toward the narrow passageway as the chamber continued to collapse behind him. He could hear the stranger's screams, but he didn't look back. The ceiling was caving in, massive stones falling like the judgment of the ancient scholars who had built this place. Luca burst through the tunnel, the cool air of the grove hitting his face like a splash of water. He stumbled out, collapsing onto the grass as the ground rumbled beneath him. He turned to look back at the archway just as he crumbled into a pile of rubble, sealing the library forever. The dust settled and the grove fell silent. The only sound was Luca's ragged breathing and the rustle of the olive leaves in the wind. He sat there for a long time, staring at the ruins. The lost library was gone, buried beneath the earth, its secrets safe from those who would exploit them. He felt a pang of sorrow for the knowledge that had been lost, but he knew that he had made the right choice. He rose slowly, brushing the dirt from his clothes. The sun was setting now, casting a warm, golden light across the hillside. The phrase from the manuscript echoed in his mind. The path to knowledge lies where shadows meet the sun. He realized now that it wasn't just about finding the library, it was about understanding the true value of knowledge and the responsibility that came with it. As he made his way back down the hill, Luca felt lighter, as if he had left a great burden behind. He didn't know what the future held, but in one thing, he had passed the test set by the ancient scholars. He had chosen wisdom over power, sacrifice over greed, and in doing so, he had become more than just an apprentice. He had become a guardian of the truth.